there's a lot of geopolitics in South America that I think we just don't touch upon enough, that are potentially driving a lot of the crisis at the border, and we should really be more aware of as we consider future foreign policy. But I'm no expert. I just dabble in it, in the expertise portion of this. So I brought on an expert, Ana Quintana. She's a senior policy analyst, Latin America and Western Hemisphere at Heritage Foundation, and all around great person to have a conversation with. Ana, thanks so much for being on.
Explain how have the drug cartels adapted to take advantage of the border crisis?
Well, so one big thing that's now that, CPB is reporting and other reporters who've gone down there have, relayed back is this new process of putting wristbands on migrants, right, to show that migrants have paid the local plaza tax. Mm-hmm. So if a migrant is going from one particular area to the next, they've put a wristband on a migrant to say hey, you've paid this cartel or this local gang's tax. You don't owe anybody anything, or if you still have an outstanding debt, it'll have a particular symbol. Everything is color coded and has a symbol, right? So if it's incredibly innovative. And this just goes back to how these guys are not just criminals, right? And this has been just a failure on Mexican policy and U.S. policy to continue to treat these guys like criminals. These are business enterprises.
Yeah, and that's what people don't realize. When I was down with Border Patrol, they charge about $300 per migrant to cross that river. And it doesn't seem like anybody gets across without going through the cartels. And this is super low risk for them. It's zero risk, actually, because they just take the money in and they point, go that way. You're not losing any drugs in the process, and in fact, it helps you smuggle drugs because now Border Patrol's tied up and not looking for you. At that break in the wall where you're sending your drug smugglers through.
Absolutely. And then different nationalities get charged different prices, right? Because Central Americans get charged a different price, right? Chinese, Arabs, if you're from a different region, you will get charged a higher premium.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that. So, we did the math, and 100,000 people going across a month, $30 million for the drug cartel. So it makes sense that they're fighting they're warring for these plazas, plazas being basically like a crossing point, I guess. That's how I understand it.
A plaza is a particular piece of territory, right? Okay. And that could either be a crossing point or whatever, but a plaza is a territory.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And the Border Patrol says they hear small arms fire across the border where these guys are just gunning it out because it's a very lucrative business. Okay.
Absolutely.
And as far as is keeping with the immigration crisis, how do these governments feel about it? We've heard from the Mexican presidents, from the El Salvador presidents that, look, they're not a fan of thousands and thousands of people coming through their country or leaving their country. It seems like our interests are aligned on this, and that's what the Trump administration figured out with the MPP protocols, which is the Remain in Mexico policy, and the asylum cooperation agreements with the Northern Triangle countries. So how did their interests align with ours?
Sure. So I think with each country, it's completely different, right? So with the Mexican government, the Mexican president is not a fan of having so many Central Americans traveling through their country and then going to the United States, right? Because frankly, polling within Mexico, over 60% of Mexicans are not a fan of the migration crisis simply because of the drain on resources, and particularly within the northern region, it's such an impediment to commerce up there. It's not something that they welcome, right? And within Guatemala, there's always been within Central America, frankly, remittances are a significant percentage of each country's GDP, right? Every country relies on it for about 12 to 15%. Remittances account for about 12 to 15% of their gross domestic product. Let's be 100% honest. And so they rely on people living what they call en el extranjero, whether it's in the United States or whatever, to send money back home to relatives. What the Trump administration did was they changed the calculus and they said, look, we are going to apply essentially so much political pressure to you guys that that money is just not going to make it palatable enough for you that you're just going to continue allowing the outflow of people. And so you now have leaders actually willing to kind of be more vocal and say, look, we need to stop this, right? We need to increase our border, kind of increase border security. We need to like start going after these human smuggling networks. And so you've seen more of that strong leadership coming out of Guatemala and El Salvador, I would say. I'd say these two have been more proactive in that. I haven't seen that much, honestly, from the Honduran government. And I think, honestly, the Honduran government is more preoccupied with the president of Honduras, frankly, is an unindicted co-conspirator in his brother's drug trafficking case. The brother was recently, he was recently convicted of trafficking cocaine in the United States. And there's now another trial going on of another Honduran drug trafficker who has pointed significantly to the president of Honduras, allowing for massive cocaine trafficking, of taking money for cocaine trafficking. And so there's interests that are aligning here, but now you have the Biden administration criticizing these guys for being, for permitting corruption and not wanting to work with them, right? So it's like, we need to find ways of aligning our interests and also collaborating as well, even when we disagree on certain issues. And that's just something that the Biden administration folks are just being a bit too activist and not, and kind of, pushing away and kind of like pushing these leaders away.
Yeah. And there's this, what I would call a childish reactionary tendency to just, if Trump did it, it must be bad, which is just Absolutely. A deeply stupid policy agenda. And you can see signs quietly of the Biden administration saying, okay, we're gonna have some agreements with Mexico now. Okay, fine, just call it something different if you want, but just please do the same thing because it seemed to be working. Look, I started off the podcast saying we have an interest in these countries being flourishing places that people want to go visit. That would be great for America. If Mexico was at peace, if the drug cartels were gone, if there were plenty of jobs to be had in the Northern Triangle countries, this would all be good. So, we did pass some legislation to that effect last Congress. What are some besides just throwing money at the problem, which doesn't seem to work in corrupt governments, what is some creative ways that we could look at to encourage development there?
Sure. So, I think it needs to start one. I hate this approach of particularly when it comes to Central America, to the Northern Triangle, at looking at these countries as a region. Each country is so individually unique and so just has its own individual level of political will, of human capital, of economic development potentials. We need to look at everybody individually, right? So like El Salvador, you have this like new young president who really wants to collaborate and work with the United States, right? You have in Guatemala a president who's all about sovereignty and who really wants to work on border security issues. And in Honduras, again, you have a president who's ensnared in all these like drug trafficking, allegations. So there's significant limitations there. One, I think we need to start talking about how do you have each country's private sector start working with them to have them start reinvesting capital back into their countries, because many of them are just looking elsewhere because they're not looking, they don't want to invest in their countries, right? They're not safe. They're not secure. Like financially, it's not a good bet for them. And there is a lot of money that these individuals just have a lot of money. Two, electricity is exceptionally expensive in this region, incredibly expensive. How do you turn these countries into big manufacturing hubs if you can't manufacture things at a competitive rate? You simply can't.
Why is it so expensive?
Because the infrastructure just isn't there.
Okay.
It's not, right? These are very poor, undeveloped countries, and the electricity is it's expensive, right? And so you have the Biden administration now saying, well, we want to reward countries who adopt green energy mandates. And it's like, you have people who are still cooking by coal outside because they can't afford to heat and power their homes.
Yeah.
Yet you want them to adopt these absurdly expensive solar powered projects. You're insane. You now have Guyana, who potentially has more oil and petroleum than like Venezuela, and yet you're pushing everybody towards green energy when Guyana could be a game changer for Latin America. Start working with Guyana. Guyana could potentially help power the Caribbean and Central America, and then help capitalize. Like, we have a free trade agreement with all of Central America and the Dominican Republic, half the DR. Central America could be a manufacturing hub. right?
Yeah.
People could actually
Instead of
stay in their
China.
countries. Exactly. Instead of China, instead of buying all this, you know, third-rate material from China, manufactured in Central America. Like there's just so much that can be done, and we're just not taking advantage of it because of all this politicized nonsense.